Hey everybody, Mr. Phil here, your online textbook tutor for AP Biology, and in this video I'll be covering section 5.2. Alright, so here we go, let's begin. Real quick, if this is the first time you're watching one of my videos, the whole purpose of what we do and why we do it is to really help you better understand your reading. Okay, I believe that there's no substitute for reading, but I really want to be a guide for you as you go through it. The format of our videos: pause the video when I tell you to pause it, read the following sections that I tell you to read, and then whenever you're done, play the video so I can help explain it to you, hopefully in an easier way. Alright, here we go. Let's go ahead and turn to page 69 and 70 and go ahead and read the following sections highlighted in red, section 5.2. Go ahead and pause right here and read. Alright, hopefully you've finished reading, and so let's begin. This whole section is on carbohydrates. Whenever you hear the word carbohydrate or carbs, I want you to think about energy. This is a quick way for our bodies to access energy. So in the pictures here, we see bread, we see rice, we see pasta, we see crackers, and we see some oats, or even like with some fruit. And yeah, all of these following food items have carbs, but they have different types of carbs, right? So they all have glucose, but especially like for bread or for rice or for pasta, these are long polymers of carbohydrates. So for example, polysaccharides, or specifically starch. If you look at the oats, like a lot of you may look at the fruit and say, well, is there even carbs in that? Yeah, there's a type of monomer of carbs called fructose, and it's a fruit sugar that is included in that fruit. Okay, so once again, just a simple picture, or some simple pictures here to really help you remember what carbs are. So these are all different types of carbs. Go back to section 5.1. Think about what we talked about. And if you didn't watch that video, I strongly suggest you watch it. Monomers versus polymers. Monomers being that one part of the train, and then polymers being many subunits repeatedly added together. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through this. Another thing to keep in mind: monosaccharide, mono, the root, meaning one, di, meaning two, and poly, meaning many subunits put together. Okay, so don't get scared by the slide, but let's just take a look at what we're talking about here. Once again, this whole section is on carbohydrates. The monomer of carbohydrates are monosaccharides. And in this video, we're going to be talking about two main monosaccharides. The one we see here in the picture that is detailed here is glucose. Poly, meaning many. So whenever you put a bunch of glucose monomers together, we don't call that like a train of glucose. No, we call it glycogen, especially for living things such as us. And humans, and the ability to store energy. Okay, so glycogen is one of the many polysaccharides that we'll talk about, but I just want to give you a quick preview here of what's to come. Okay, any single time you think about sugar, think about glucose, think about sugar. Okay, glucose is pretty much a small subunit of sugar, and it's easily accessible for our bodies to use for energy. Okay, whenever you think about cellular respiration, or how our bodies make energy, it starts with glucose and oxygen. Right? So once again, this is a very fundamental word that is going to be used not only in chapter 5, but also in chapter 9, and any single time we're talking about energy creation. Okay, energy source for living things. Here in the slide, these are just all the same. Like they're all the same. So glucose, here we see a linear form, here we see a ball and stick model, and here we kind of see like a 3D form. So these are all images of glucose here. Another monomer that is talked about in the textbook is fructose. But the first thing you can probably take a look at is the molecular formulas are the same, C6H12O6. So what makes them different? Well, these are actually isomers. And if you take a look at the structures, they're different, but if you take a look at the formulas, they're the same. Okay. Fructose is fruit sugar, and it's actually found in different areas versus glucose. So fructose is mainly found in fruits. Okay. So just keep that in mind, and as we go through, glucose and fructose are both monomers specifically monosaccharides, since we're now talking about carbohydrates. Okay. And I just want to briefly talk about this because maybe like you're a little bit confused in the textbook. Glucose is an aldehyde sugar, or an aldose, and fructose is a ketone sugar. The main things you should know is whenever something is an aldose versus a ketone, it just kind of it's all about where is the carbonyl group. So here for glucose on the right, the carbonyl group is on the end, making it an aldose. Any single time a compound or a molecule, or sorry, like a compound is called an aldose, and I want you to think about, okay, well, its carbonyl group, its C double bond O, is located on the end, versus a ketone, it's located somewhere in the middle where there's two groups on the side. Take a look at figure 5.3, and I can't show it on the screen, but hopefully you can just follow along in your textbook. Here we see a table. Okay, we see 3 columns: trioses, pentoses, and hexoses. So all that talks about is how many carbons there are in each of them. And then we got our aldoses versus ketoses. Same thing I just talked about. Take a look at the orange component. As you can see here, all of the aldoses, right, glyceraldehyde, ribose, glucose, galactose, all of them have their carbonyl group towards the end. That is the only thing you need to know about aldoses. Ketoses, right, the following 3, they all have their carbonyl group somewhere near the middle or in an area where there's groups on both sides of it. Okay, and yes, where the carbonyl group is, it does give it a different property. Okay, so don't worry too much about this figure, but I just wanted to point that out and hopefully better explain that to you. Okay, section 5.4. So take a look at that picture right now. Main things you need to know here. Here are all forms of glucose. Here we see the linear form. As you can see, like it's all drawn out, like there's 6 carbons straight down. And then you see the kind of like 3D model of it, and we call it the ring form. Once again, same structure. It's just a different way to look at these different things. So they're all glucose, but as you can see, like they're just different forms that you'll go ahead and look at throughout biology. Section 5.5. Okay, so the 2 main disaccharides the book talked about was the first one is maltose. Okay, malt sugar, it's an ingredient used in brewing beer. And then we get sucrose. And sucrose, once again, is a disaccharide, meaning 2. And the sucrose is pretty much like table sugar. Like you go to a restaurant and you see sugar. But how do you make them? So we talked about it in 5.1. In order to put 2 monosaccharides together, okay, in this case 2 glucoses together to form maltose, we need to do a dehydration reaction. And any single time a dehydration reaction happens, you are losing water to make a bond. The book also talks about how this bond is now considered a glycosidic linkage. So go ahead and write that down. A glycosidic linkage. It's just a covalent bond formed between these 2 monosaccharides. Okay, so we got maltose and we got sucrose. As you can see here, these are like in figure 5.5, it talks about the 2 different structures there as they come together. Here we go, let's keep going. Okay, so for this next section, go ahead and pause it here and read section 5.2, specifically pages 71 and page 72, and it's going to be the areas detailed in red. Thanks. Alrighty, so hopefully you enjoyed the following sections, section 5.2 and page 71 and page 72. Let me go ahead and help you better understand it. Okay, the 3 main polysaccharides that we learned about in this following reading was starch, glycogen, and cellulose. Any single time so like how do humans store glucose? How do plants store it? So these are just different ways here. I want to go ahead and start talking about figure 5.6. Okay, so we're talking about polysaccharides, long chains of glucose just put together in different ways. So for starch, this is how plants store glucose. Okay, and as you can see here in figure 5.6, we got amylose and we got amylopectin. And these are just different polysaccharides here. But once again, take a look at the picture. All those little hexagons are pretty much glucoses put together. Lots of dehydration reactions chaining together and creating these long starch molecules. And whenever we consume just like these different foods that are starch, like just think about this this long chain here. Okay, same thing to the right. Okay, glycogen. Every single time we eat glucose, but we don't immediately use it in our muscle cells and in liver, like our liver, we can store that glucose, but we don't store it as those little monomers. We store it as a long polysaccharide called glycogen. So keep that in mind. Glycogen is mainly for humans and just other vertebrates in which we need a way to store glucose. So later on, like throughout our day, we can actually go access it, hydrolyze those bonds, cut them out into glucose, and actually use that glucose for cellular respiration. Okay, so keep that in mind. Section 5.7, or figure 5.7, take a look. Main thing here, these are just different glucose ring structures, the alpha version and the beta version. And all you gotta know here is starch and cellulose, yeah, both of them are polysaccharides, but they look way different. Starch here is more of linkages between alpha glucose monomers, and cellulose is mainly linkages between beta glucose monomers. Shape determines function, and just because they are flipped or like they look different, it's going to give it a different property. Okay, so keep that in mind for that one. Go ahead and take a look at 5.8. Cellulose is our last polysaccharide that we'll talk about. For cellulose, it's pretty much, okay, so always think about what makes up the plant structure and what makes it so rigid and so tough. It's actually cellulose. These are long fibrils that actually compose cellular walls and just really make give plants that firm structure. Okay, cellulose, as you can see here in figure 5.8, once again, a bunch of glucose monomers, but it's used for a different function in this case. We're almost done. Let's go ahead and finish up here. Go ahead and read chapter 5.2, page 74, and the areas marked in red. Pause and read, please. All right, so let's finish up here. So any single plant, its walls are made up of cellulose. So I really want you to just remember that. Is it digestible by humans? No, mainly because of its structure and also because we don't have the enzymes to digest them. Versus starch or any of those starchy foods, any single time we consume them, we have the enzymes to break them up into the glucose molecules for us to use. So cellulose, it's in the book, it talked about it being insoluble fiber. Okay, so how about some organisms that can digest cellulose? Well, in the textbook, it talked about cows and termites, right? The reason why these two can digest cellulose is because they have the enzymes necessary, the prokaryotes, the bacteria in their systems to break down cellulose for them to use. Another polysaccharide that it talked about right at the end, and I want you to take a look at figure 5.10, is chitin. Chitin is really interesting because chitin is it's actually super strong. So it's used in insects, spiders, crustaceans, and other animals, especially to build their exoskeletons. It's also used medically to make strong thread that decomposes after like a wound or an incision heals. Okay, so really take a look at those. But just as a recap of what we talked about the monosaccharides, the disaccharides, and the polysaccharides, all different versions of carbohydrates. So hopefully you enjoyed this video and hopefully it helped. Have a good one.